Hey, hello, I'm back. Nice to see you again, hope you're keeping well. How long's it been? 2 years, something? 2 years since the last video? Oh, crumbs.
The Floppy.
You know, a lot has changed in the last half decade. I'm living in a different country, I've got a new haircut, bought a bird feeder. Lots changed, a lot's changed. I'll tell you what hasn't changed though, nostalgia. The last few years have thrown up some weird, scary, alienating changes for a lot of people, and it's times like this when nostalgia does its best trade. It can be quite soothing to reach back into the past and pluck out a few saucy, comforting little nuggets. Now, I'd love to get around to making a video about the positives and negatives of nostalgia, but that's going to have to wait for another decade. Today, I'd like to tell you about one of the games that registers very highly on my personal nostalgia yardstick. Remember yardsticks?
No.
It's a game called Moonstone, a hard day's night. You get it? Which is a high fantasy game through and through. I mean, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at him! Now, I have never been a fan of high fantasy. I know somebody's buying it, but it's just not for me. Particularly when it takes itself too seriously and forces a load of proprietary fantasy guff on you, and it all gets a bit...
And lo, brave barbarian Tuggathon Groupon thrust the glistering candle towards the crimson firmament. He vowed to free the Kragan lands of Peepee Nance from the tyrannical grasp of Wizard Lord Oonana.
Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't engage me. I'd rather be cleaning my wheelie bins or, I don't know, eating a handful of pins. However, Moonstone was different. Not only could I tolerate this game, I adored this game. It was released in 1991 by Mindscape for the Amiga and MS-DOS. The box art lets you know exactly what you're in for. Knights, dragons, and so much fun, you'll die. Cheer up, Goth. There's just something about the presentation of this game which diffuses my fantasy bullshit alarm. Look, by way of example, take a look at this. What you're watching here is the intro. For its time, this was amazing. A fully animated atmospheric movie with druids, rituals, dramatic music, lightning, chanting, and anticlimax. And there's something about the use of colour and the design of the characters that lets you know that this isn't just humourless high fantasy. I mean, just compare the tone of Moonstone's intro to that of Shadow of the Beast 2. Moonstone? Shadow of the Beast 2. Moonstone? Shadow of the Beast 2. Cheer up, Goth. An intro like this is an impressive feat for the Amiga, and it's doubly impressive given that this, along with the rest of the game, was squeezed onto just 3 floppy disks. The whole thing comes in at a whopping 2.57 meg. Just to put it all in perspective for you, that's a little under half of the file size of a high-resolution photo of the Conservative MP for the constituency of Bexhill and Battle, Hugh Merriman. And we'll just let that one sink in for a minute, eh? You're right there, Hugh. Looking beyond the fantasy wrapper, you'll find that this game is a bit of a unique beast. Moonstone is part turn-based. Sometimes it's top-down, sometimes it's a side-on stab-em-up. It's got elements of light RPG and strategy, and can host anywhere from 1 to 4 players, which is pretty rare compared to its contemporaries. You didn't get a whole lot of action-based Amiga games that allowed you to get down with your freaky foursome. It puts me in mind of modern indie games that have a local multiplayer focus. Moonstone just exudes that sort of energy in a way that a lot of older games just don't. So, onto the gameplay. The first thing you're asked to do is pick your name and your champion.
Good day, I'm Timmy Dinners.
They all play the same, but each night starts on a different area of the map, and each has its own beasties, cities, and terrains to interact with. You can wander a certain distance every day, as dictated by your character's endurance stat, and once you've gone as far as you can go, play hands over to one of the other knights controlled by the computer.
Or one of your wee pals.
Likelihood is, on any given turn, you'll have enough juice to get you to one of these dolmens. Hang on a second. Dolmens, which is where the fun happens. This is where the game throws off the shackles of po-faced fantasy with tons of campy, gruesome gore. So much so that at the time it was notable as one of the goriest games around. This game was so violent it was banned in Germany due to the perceived effect it might have on
Die Kinder.
Shame really, because in German it would be called
Moonstone.
which is...
Super toll.
Matter of fact, I think it's still banned in Germany to this day, which is...
Nicht super toll.
Anyway, back to the bloodshed. Depending on which dolmen you arrive at, you'll be greeted by one of any number of creatures from Moonstone's proprietary menagerie.
He's got a thesaurus, hasn't he?
There are trogs, who swing around axes, spears and grim-looking stone sledgehammers. War beasts, who've got lovely hair and run straight into swords. Trolls, who are a bit like the Blue Man Group. Remember them? Blue Man Group? Oh, Ratmen, who are adorable little Jim Henson creations who are more than willing to help you do the old dignitas.
That's not funny.
Then we have mudmen, who might look like they're made of dog tod, but are terrifying enough to have their own spoopy Hammond organ accompaniment. Finally, we've got these fellas. Now, these are called ballocks. Look, someone's getting a laugh out of it. Oh, no, there we go. Amiga action. Straight in there. Straight in there. It's a testicle joke. It's a testicle joke. It's hard not to like these guys. Just look at them. Look at them go. Well, didn't care for that. Aside from monsters, you can fight other player-controlled knights in a one-on-one battle. Or if you're playing single player, the player-controlled knights will be replaced by itinerant black knights like Sir William here. Now, it is customary, once you've disposed of an opponent, to give him one of these. I don't think this was intended as a taunt, but look at it. It's a move that just screams. How embarrassing for you. I love improvised taunts in games. On top of the beasties and knights, there are also boss creatures like Windy, Titwitch, and this big daft lad. Each of these enemies requires a different strategy to beat, and each has their own uniquely grotesque way of venting the complex and nuanced emotions that they're feeling inside.
I want Britain to be back British.
Aside from these action set pieces, the game is divided between looting corpses and travelling to towns, strongholds and towers where you can do your big shop, bother the natives, gather information, increase your stats, or gamble responsibly. All of this is in service of the ultimate goal, to liberate a Moonstone from the Valley of the Gods and take it to this Stonehenge to cement your place in history as a big, cool dude of some sort. This game is very charming, no doubt, and it squeezes a lot of juicy goodness into very tight constraints. The presentation is sublime. The art is bright and gory. The sound effects are punchy and enemy design is varied and interesting. It's a great, self-contained little adventure with a fully animated intro and ending sequence. However, there are problems. But before we get onto those, let's cleanse our collective palate and enjoy a brief, restorative moment with a high-resolution photo of the Conservative MP for the constituency of Bexhill and Battle, Hugh Merriman. Here he is now. He's worth his weight in crisps. Okay, so I've put it off long enough. Let's talk about the negatives. First, there's not a lot of music. The soundtrack was composed by the late, great Richard Joseph and offers up a wonderfully pared down, moody soundscape of druidic chanting and drumming. But there's not a lot of it. Outside of cutscenes, visiting towns and loading screens, the game is shot through with... That's a bit of rice cake in my throat. It's dry. It's dry rice cake. And the other thing that bothered me after playing this game for the first time in literal decades was how floaty it feels. There's a real lag between input and action. Might be that I've been spoiled by the modern games and the crisp, minty controls, but it's just so much jankier than I remember it being. The controls are simple enough. You move in the direction you push the joystick, and if you hold the fire button down while moving the joystick, you'll stay in place and swing, stab, fling, slash and feint, depending on which direction you're holding. It's kind of IK Plus meets Bushido Blade, except it's not as good as either of those. It's sticky, laggy, chewy, itchy, scratchy, poochy.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
It just doesn't feel as responsive as a game like this needs to be. For example, you can parry certain attacks, but due to the aforementioned stickiness and lack of any considerable telegraphing from opponents, it just might as well have not been included at all. you find yourself after a while trying to compensate for the jank. You have to be really careful due to the amount of time it takes to wind up and deliver some attacks. To play well is to play cautiously. You have to get good. It's almost like
So much fun.
I mean, you could almost say it's
You'll die.
you could almost say it's Dark Souls.
Cheer up, Goth.
Another minor whinge is having to swap discs on loading screens. I know it's a necessary evil, and I know it's nowhere near as bad as some of its contemporaries, but it does somewhat break up the flow. Upon its release, the eminent magazines of the day gave Moonstone a mixed reception. Some, like Amiga Action and Amiga Computing, gave it percentages in the high 80s and 90s. Others, like German publication Amiga Joker, gave it a middling 54% and were very vocal about
Das Blut.
It's a shame that Moonstone was neither a critical nor commercial success upon its release. It did fare better on its re-release, and over the years it has gained a bit of a cult following, particularly in Europe. I mean, that's no surprise, as Europe is the home of the home computer. It never managed to crack the US. One of the reasons being that Toys R Us refused to stock it, and Sega and Nintendo wouldn't publish it for a console release, all because of the gore, which you can turn off. It's weird to think that just a year later, Mortal Kombat, the big poster child for gory splat-em-up games, would release on all the big systems in one form or another, Sega and Nintendo included. I mean, imagine what Moonstone could have become if it had benefited from a wider release. We might have seen sequels, reboots, spiritual successors, pinball machines, bird feeders. Who knows?
No.
Who knows?
No.
Anyway, Moonstone is a great game. It's a very singular title and very ahead of its time. As a modern player or even as a retro fan, if you can get past the lumpy controls, occasional jank and disc swapping, there's a lot to enjoy. If nothing else, and from a purely personal and nostalgic point of view, I think this game is brilliant. In fact, I might go so far as to say that even after all these years, this game makes me a very, very merry man. Good night, everybody.